Let's go ahead and get started with our first guest. He is a political analyst and he reached out to come on to discuss a lot of things that are happening, in particular in the West Bank, and then also, of course, what went wrong, I think, for the Democratic Party in Michigan, as he was a part of that as well. His name is Abdelrahman. Let's go ahead and bring him in. Abdel, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me on.
So I want to get started with this recent story that just happened in the West Bank. And again, I don't think this is getting a lot of coverage because a lot of us have been focusing on Gaza. But for those who are not aware, the BBC witnessed Israeli settlers attack on Palestinian farm in the West Bank. So this was just one day ago. And it's rather interesting. I was surprised the BBC even published this, to be honest with you. They have not been on the right side of this issue. But what it says here is that dozens of settlers charging down from the illegal outpost above his farm. They're talking about Brahman. And across the field towards us, we're moving fast and carrying large sticks. So the BBC, the news network, was present in the West Bank, and they happened to witness one of these attacks from a group of settlers that was against Brahman's olive trees in the occupied West Bank. I want to get into this a little bit, Abdel. Do you think it is interesting that now all of a sudden it seems like the corporate news networks are willing to discuss the occupation that's happening in the West Bank, or that they're even talking about the settlers at all?
Yeah, I definitely do think it's a very dynamic shift. I think if you juxtapose the media attention that the Israeli occupation of the Palestinians in the West Bank got prior to October 7th to now, it's pretty astronomical. But I think the reason for that being is that the settlers broadcast their crimes very easily on social media. And it's really allowing people to access to see what the settlers do to Palestinians in the West Bank. It's very hard to ignore. The United Nations, I think just the other week, came out and said that there have been close to 800 settler attacks on Palestinians from the beginning of 2025 to present day, and that this current pace is on track to surpass the past 30 years worth of settler violence that the United Nations has recorded in its entirety since the occupation of the West Bank by Israel began in 1967. But I think what is really starting to also bring attention to the settler enterprise is that, Western nations, the United States under the Biden administration, sanctioned many illegal settlers, sanctioned a lot of their entities that crowdfund their activities. Same thing with Canada, same thing with the European Union and Australia. So it's very hard to ignore this phenomenon. And I think you really hit on a really crucial point. Yes, we are all focused on the genocide in Gaza, but we should make no mistake that Israel is using the cover of genocide in Gaza to ethnically cleanse the West Bank. And that is, being done with the settlers being an instrument of violence against the Palestinians.
That's right. I do feel like it is forgotten about that while our attention is focused on one area, and meanwhile, like, Israel is making multiple attacks. And I continue to tell people this has been going on for a long time. There was a woman that appeared on Piers Morgan. I'm not sure if you saw this, but she apparently is the mother of the settler movement in the West Bank. I found her words really disturbing. And alarming. Of course, no sympathy there from her. Piers Morgan did ask her about the children that have been killed, and there was nothing there from her. How did this even begin in the West Bank with the settlements, with settlers coming in and stealing Palestinian homes? Where did that all start?
Well, to answer your first point, the godmother of the settler movement in the West Bank, her name is Danielle Weiss, and she founded the Nakhala movement, and she was also recently sanctioned by Canada, along with Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, and they have the keen interest of ethnically cleansing the West Bank of Palestinians, same thing with Gaza, to create a greater Israel and essentially annex the West Bank and Gaza. to essentially create a land where it's just Jews. There are no Palestinians, there are no Arabs, there are no Muslims, there are no Christians, there are no otherwise. As it pertains to the origin points of the Israeli settler movement, you have to go back to 1967. Israel seized the West Bank in the Six-Day War. They also seized East Jerusalem. And from there, you started to see the Israeli government take a very keen interest in blocking really any path to Palestinian autonomy, independence, or statehood. So they decided to proliferate what's called either farming outposts or settlements. And the key machination of these settlements is to bisect the West Bank Palestinian communities from natural resources, from Jerusalem, and essentially create these segregated enclaves in which Palestinians have no autonomy. Now, how does this happen? There are many charitable organizations here in the United States that actively fund the Israeli settler movement, one of them being the Jewish National Fund, Himenuda, Amana. And what these organizations do is they proliferate illegal settler outposts and illegal farming outposts across the West Bank. They issue phony authorization certificates and deeds to these settlers saying that this land is theirs, even though that settlement or that farming outpost is built on private Palestinian land. And in effect, the settlers who then take control of that land, whether through the issuance of a fraudulent authorization certificate or a grazing right, has access to the land. And they use that very small strip of land with weapons from the IDF, particularly American manufactured assault rifles, to intimidate Palestinian communities, to harass them, and in many instances, sometimes even kill them. Yanon Levy, who was once sanctioned by the Biden administration under Executive Order 14115, had actually just killed a Palestinian who helped produce No Other Land that won an Emmy, or I believe that won an Oscars. So this is really how it all began. It's a top-down, sometimes even bottom-up investment in which the occupation invests from the outside world into the West Bank to actively displace Palestinians with the sole goal of ethnically cleansing it.
So essentially, if we look at the settlers, because they're behaving like they're law enforcement, but they're not, from what I understand, that would essentially be similar if here in the United States, civilians just rose up and started, setting fire to people's homes and taking people's homes and land, and law enforcement doing absolutely nothing about it, just giving them a pass because they want those people gone as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Allow me to take the analogy even further. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote in his book, The Message, that when he visited the West Bank, it reminded him of Jim Crow and segregation here in the United States. And he even likened the occupation of the West Bank to South Africa, apartheid. Now imagine this. Imagine you are an African-American woman in the 40s or 50s or 60s, and you see the Ku Klux Klan walking around your city. They're burning a cross on your front yard. They have a weapon. They're intimidating you, and they have the backing and the blessings of the local law enforcement, and they want to evict the Black community in that area to make it white only. Now, apply those specific set of principles to the West Bank as it pertains to these settlers. What the settlers are doing, under the blessings of both the Israeli Defense Ministry and the Israeli National Security Ministry, which is headed by Ben-Gvir, what they're doing is they're issuing weapons permits en masse to violent settlers or individuals who are not even fit to carry an assault rifle or a weapon. And what they're doing is creating what's called patrol units in the West Bank. And these patrol units are established across various outposts and across various regional councils which govern the West Bank. And imagine it as a bunch of Jewish vigilantes going around the West Bank, intimidating, harassing, and assaulting and violently expropriating Palestinian land. And the government is aware of it, or the government of Israel, to be precise. Benjamin Netanyahu is aware of it. Bezalel Smotrich is aware of it. And they have essentially given the settlers carte blanche to do whatever they want to the Palestinians. So if the IDF can't, go house to house and kill all the Palestinians, and these violent settlers who are essentially acting as de facto vigilantes will.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think that it's really disturbing to me. The videos that I've seen, the things that I've read, I noticed they have a tendency to also burn the farms,
Hmm.
so that they can't produce food in whatever way. It's so obvious to me. Um, as a Palestinian American, how do you feel currently, particularly in the U.S., where you're seeing all these different rulings that are coming from, whether it's the ADL, whether it's from APAC, all these things that are being pushed forward in favor of Israel and against the Palestinian movement?
Well, it's the dystopian, draconian, and authoritarian. There are simply no other words, and I think the reason why you're seeing APAC and the ADL scramble to pursue legislation or kind of create like this de facto thought police is because they know that public sentiment has turned against them. That the United States, many Americans, even those on the right, who once were their most adamant supporters, are no longer Zionists. They no longer believe that the United States and Israel have shared values or a mutual partnership which benefits both nations. I would say my individual feelings of it is that I've grown quite numb to it. I think for the past 2 years, and seeing the United States essentially have unwavering military support for Israel as it commits genocide in Gaza is harrowing. But we also have to remember that prior to October 7th, there's 50, 60 years of U.S. foreign policy that has supported Israel, has supported the occupation of the West Bank, has supported creating Gaza into an open air prison. And I do think that you are starting to see a lot of initiatives from the Arab community, from human rights organizations, and from independent media itself, really taking a stand against this. Because I think corporate media has a very big hand to play in kind of covering for Israel and whitewashing their crimes. And this is why shows like yours and Glenn Greenwald or others are gaining popularity, because they won't platform a voice like mine because they're scared of my narrative and they're scared of the truth that I espouse and other Palestinians. But no good deed goes unpunished. So the tides are changing, and I truly do believe that in the next couple of years you'll start to see that those who take a pro-Israel stance will be quite vulnerable here in American society and will be prone to significant amounts of criticism.
Mm. What happens if Israel does fully annex the West Bank?
Well, I think there are two ways of looking at it. One, I am of the belief that if Israel annexes the West Bank, it doesn't really change the facts on the ground. First and foremost, Palestinians that live in the West Bank, whether an area A or B or C, which are kind of these, implementations that were given through the Oslo Accords, they have no autonomy. They have no independence. For an example, they can't even graze their own land. They can't move freely. They're subjected to brutal checkpoints. They live under the Israeli military law, right? They don't have access to voting rights. They have no democratic way of opposing what the government of Israel does to them. And I also think we have to bear in mind here that any type of annexation at first would just be symbolic. There would be a formal recognition, a formal annexation of the West Bank, in which Israel would try to go on this kind of diplomatic tour de France to get other countries to recognize the West Bank as part of Israel. Now, if annexation does indeed occur, which I believe it occurred about 20 or 30 years ago, this is going to embolden and incite settlers to behave more crazed and more violent than they are now. And you might say, how is that humanly possible? Well, I think the past couple of years have proven that it could always get worse. So as it pertains to changing the reality on the ground, annexation really doesn't change much. The government of Israel is saying it. What's going to really have a big factor is the United States going to put its foot down and say, we are not going to recognize the West Bank as part of Israel? Or Canada, the United Nations, the European Union, members of the Five Eyes intelligence community that cooperates with the United States for, precious intelligence sharing, are they going to have a big say in what type of punishment there will be for that? Will there be economic sanctions? Will there be diplomatic isolation? If you see one of those two things occur, then it's positive, and that may push back Israel. But if you see nothing, then unfortunately it may get worse.
What do you think about the other Arab countries? There's been a lot of attention on them since October 7th.
Hmm.
It appears that countries like Egypt and Jordan are going along with what Israel and the United States wants. How does that make you feel? I know I look at that and it's disturbing because to me it's like, why would you not? Why are you supporting Israel? And obviously, there's money interest here, where especially in reference to Egypt, where they do have like this relationship with the United States. But to sit back and watch an entire population be exterminated, it's a genocide that's happening right now, and to side with the genocider. Like, how do you feel about countries like Egypt and Jordan that are just basically kind of sitting by, well, and Saudi Arabia too, to be honest?
Hmm. Well, I think as it pertains to Jordan and Egypt, they're significantly hamstrung, and they have no political or military maneuverability in this case because they're incredibly reliant upon the United States for security guarantees, for military guarantees, and Israel is also a benefactor of that alliance because much of um, the relationship between the U.S. and Egypt and Jordan is contingent upon how friendly those nations are with Israel. So, in effect, deciding to not recognize Israel anymore or attacking Israel would probably have dire consequences for those respective countries, and they know it. I think that they've seen what's happened over the past few years, and they've realized there's not really nothing that they feel that they can do. How does it make me feel? Well, I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised at all. One being is that in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, 16, 18, 2019, 2021, and 2022, Israel violently assaulted Gaza, and Egypt and Jordan, didn't really do much to stop it. Did they play some type of diplomatic role in ending the hostilities? Absolutely. But they didn't, kick out the Israeli ambassador to their respective countries. They didn't tear up their peace treaties. They didn't find other avenues of diplomacy. They stuck with the course. I should also say that I think in these very slight defense of Egypt and Jordan, they know one false move means that is the end of their regimes, meaning that if they attack Israel or they provoke or they don't cooperate with them in some way, that they genuinely do fear that Israel will use this as a prerequisite or an excuse to attack Egypt or Jordan, or push the Palestinians into Egypt or Jordan in creating a cataclysmic series of events, both from a humanitarian and economic standpoint. So that's what Jordan and Egypt are faced with right now, is this conundrum of do nothing and hope the United States simply puts its foot down, or it does something and essentially upends its own stability internally.
Yeah, I don't think that Jordan and Egypt are actually safe from Israel. When I look at that Greater Israel project that Netanyahu loves to flash in front of Congress, I think I predict that Israel. I just don't think that they would stop a Gaza in the West Bank.
No.
We already see them going after Syria and things like that as well. And I predict that Israel will go into Jordan, that they will go into Egypt. Like, it's just, and I believe the United States government knows this. I believe the U.S. government knows. I feel like when I talked to Brian uh, Berlatek, he was trying to explain to the audience that the foreign policy decisions were made years ago, especially in reference to the Middle East. So I feel like they may think that they're safe, but I don't think they are.
Um, I think it's too soon to say whether or not Israel will invade Egypt or Jordan, and I think that's why they've done nothing, is because they know that any attempt will essentially mean invasion. Um, but I think to kind of accentuate your point about these foreign policy decisions being made a long time ago, the Arab and Gulf states have a treaty with the United States where essentially they have a memorandum of understanding that their militaries cannot have both a quantitative and qualitative advantage over Israel, meaning they can't have more F-35s or F-16s. They can't have a bigger military, a bigger missile stockpile. So from a legislative standpoint, the United States has worked in conjunction with Israel to keep the Middle East very weak.
Yeah, I can see that. I want to pivot to Michigan. There was something that you said here I want to show everybody because I think some people are still trying to figure this one out. Although I will say that, Butch Ware did warn people last year that they were not going to win Michigan. You said here, I covered the elections from Michigan last year and wrote about how the Arab Americans were feeling. Democrats dropped the ball in Michigan, but they were unwilling to break with Biden's horrendous policies on Gaza. This left an opening for Trump, allowing him to win the election. Let's talk about this because this is
Hmm.
something that I think I definitely did not understand last year, where there were some Arab Americans in Michigan that publicly came forward and said that they were going to support Donald Trump. And I that was baffling to me. I didn't think Kamala was going to stop sending weapons to Israel either, because she made that very clear in interviews that she would not withhold weapons to Israel. She wouldn't call it a genocide. There's a number of
Hmm.
things that we could go through that we've gone through before on this show. But I think what was surprising to me was when there was a group of Arab Americans in Michigan that said that they were going to be supporting Trump. And then I saw that Donald Trump came to either Dearborn or part of Dearborn.
He
He
came to
came there.
Dearborn, yeah.
He came to Dearborn, but Kamala did not. What happened there? What happened in Michigan? Give us the lowdown.
So we have to kind of start from October 7th and then go kind of all the way up to, roughly about October of last year. As we both know, the United States began arming Israel very violently to support its genocidal campaign in Gaza. And in many of the swing states across America, there are highly concentrated populations of Arab Americans, particularly in Michigan. There are about approximately 420,000 Arab Americans in Michigan, many of whom are Muslim, and some are Christian. With that said, there was this feeling amongst mainstream Democratic elites and corporate media that, Biden's kind of unapologetic support of Israel would not be consequential at all, would not bear any type of electoral consequences for the Biden campaign and, in effect, Kamala Harris's campaign. They felt that the Arab American vote was inconsequential. And that most Americans and also the Arab American community would rather just vote for Biden over Trump. Well, here's what they did not understand, is that Arab Americans for the past 20 plus years prior to this great shift, as I call it, were supporting the Democratic Party in wake of the September 11th attacks on the United States and how kind of hawkish the Republican Party came. And that essentially moved the Arab American vote from the right to the left. Well, Arab Americans felt that Biden and Harris and continuing these genocidal policies and not enforcing U.S. law as it pertains to weapon shipments, they were behaving no differently than, let's say, Bush or Dick Cheney. And you had the birth of the uncommitted movement here in Michigan, which really try to put pressure on the Democratic Party to essentially say, Palestine is a significant voter issue, not just for Arab Americans, but for Americans, and we will not support you unless you break away from Biden's policies. She refused to do that. Kamala Harris, that is. I actually spoke with many individuals who attended rallies protesting Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris would tell Arab Americans to shut up or else Trump's going to win. And she kind of had this very condescending attitude. And I think Trump, picking up the political tea leaves, saw this is an opportunity to really steal the election in a way. And he came to Michigan, he campaigned, he met with Arab Americans, and he told them that he had a very keen interest in ending the quote unquote war in Gaza, as he told community leaders. I spoke with people close to his campaign, his administration. There were many Arab Americans who are working on his campaign, trying to lobby Michiganders to vote for him. And what this did was it kind of created a sense of trust, per se, between the Trump administration and the Arab American community. But I also want to kind of debunk one myth. I think there were more Arab Americans that decided to not vote than to vote for Donald Trump. Yes, those who voted for Donald Trump, but for those who just simply decided not to vote, they voted because they were sick and tired of seeing these genocidal policies in Gaza. But I also want to say one more quick thing on this, is that we should not interpret the Arab American support for Trump as support for the MAGA movement. When I was writing about this foreign policy magazine last year, and for The Hill, doing some freelance writing, dozens of individuals told me, look, right now we're trying to create political capital for ourselves. And if we vote for Trump, it's going to send a greater message to the Democratic Party that, listen, you dropped the ball, you ignored us, and now you have suffered the consequences for that. And while that gamble in the short term may not pay off because we're seeing the horrendous and hawkish policies of the Trump administration, the long-term gamble was correct. It was the long-term move that was the right move, because now Democrats are forced to reckon with their decision to abandon Arab Americans to support Israel. And now we're starting to see sentiment on the right shift. So it wasn't about supporting Donald Trump. It was about sending a message that A, Palestinian human rights matter, and that B, Arab Americans have political capital in this country and that they will exercise it, and that they are not married to one political party.
So this is really interesting. I'm glad that you said that, because I think some people may have made that assumption that those who did vote for Trump in Michigan may be part of MAGA or whatever, but it doesn't seem to be that way. It seems like it was more so a message, or sending a message to the Democratic Party. Seems like it to me. And I guess the question I have is, why do you feel more stayed home and didn't vote third party?
Well, there were some people in the Arab American community who were fans of Jill Stein. But having talked to some of those individuals who initially pledged support for Jill Stein, said they either didn't vote for Jill Stein because they felt it was a greater message to abstain from what they call, what was described to me as, a violent system, an unfair system where they're stuck with two horrific choices, where there's, the idea of picking between the lesser of two evils was just very taxing on them, and they were just very upset with it. And because they felt that at the end of the day, when researchers would go back and canvass and explore, the amount of possible votes that they could have had from the Arab American community, had the Democratic Party aligned with the Arab American sentiment, that would have a much more profound electoral impact on policymaking vis-a-vis the U.S. and Israel relationship. So they felt it would be more significant to not vote than to vote third party.
That is interesting. And for those who are not aware, when you look at the numbers, because as you can imagine, people are still pointing their fingers at Jill Stein and blaming Jill Stein for this, but the numbers don't reflect this at all. Some of the Kamala supporters are saying that, of course, Jill Stein, it's her fault that Kamala didn't win. The numbers don't indicate that. In fact,
No.
the numbers indicate that most people stayed home, and that's across the U.S.
Yep. I think this had one of the lowest voter turnouts in any history of a presidential election. I mean, they're two unsavory choices. I mean, Kamala Harris is very uninspiring. She doesn't really seem to have her own set of principles. She's very bland. She seems very disingenuous. And of course, Trump is, for all intents and purposes, not a very good person, and can be quite disruptive. Some of that good, most of that not good. And you have Americans who are saying, I won't take part in this charade. It's of no use. And it's definitely reflected in the polls.
Are you surprised? Because, Donald Trump, under his first presidency, he did implement the Muslim ban.
Mm-hmm.
Are you surprised that some may have believed him when he said that he was going to end the genocide in Gaza? Well, called it a war. I call it genocide, that he was going to end that in Gaza.
Well, I think there's two ways of answering that. One is that what would a human being do if their back was against the wall, right? When, like I said, when Arabs voted for Donald Trump, the sums that did, it was a desperate attempt to send a message and to the Democrats, but it was also trying to double down on the fact that Trump really is a wild card. He's unpredictable, and if there's anybody who is as volatile and unpredictable and as unethical as Trump is, when you pull all of those elements into a bag, it's a very volatile combination, meaning that Trump would probably have a higher chance of breaking, specific dogmas in the status quo around Israel, the U.S.-Israel relationship, than Kamala Harris, than Joe Biden, who seemed very married to these principles, very married to these ideas. Trump is not really married to any specific set of principles. He only cares about himself. And I think if you can leverage that of, hey, Trump, if you end the genocide in Gaza, you'll get a Nobel Peace Prize. They'll build a statue of you. Appealing to his ego had a higher chance in the eyes of some other people in the Arab American community and really just across a broad political spectrum than voting for a party and the Democrats or Biden or Harris, who just quite frankly are two very uninspiring individuals and would not really do much to break the status quo.
And it was the Arab American community that came out to support Joe Biden in 2020. And people forget Hillary Clinton lost Michigan too. And it's like, so it's I don't know. It's like they're biting the people that their own supporters, the people that are coming out that help them win. And that's who they turn their back against. And I tried to give people this morning, and I just think that, and I still go back to it. Some people still disagree, but I do think that if Kamala would have said, no, I'm going to withhold weapons from Israel, I think if she would have allowed a Palestinian American to speak at the Democratic National Convention, I think if she would have called it a genocide, she probably could have won Michigan.
No, she would have won the election resoundingly. A lot of polling suggests that the Institute for Middle East Understanding Policy Project did some survey polling across swing states, and they came to the conclusion that Gaza had a very big factor in determining the outcome of those elections and the outcome of the election in those specific states. And if Kamala Harris just simply broke from Joe Biden, she wins the election. Because, and I actually wrote about this too, covering it, union workers here in the Midwest are kind of like the backbone of the Democratic Party's constituency. And it's typically the unions in the UAW and so on and so forth, and the teachers' unions that support Democrats. And some of those unions actually broke from Kamala Harris because of Gaza. And they came out and they actually just, many that I talked to said, we didn't vote Democrat because of Gaza. I mean, hardworking Americans don't want to see their tax dollars fund a genocide. So it's not just me saying this. I could go and poll you right now, 20, 30, 40 average Americans who have just ordinary names and ordinary backgrounds who says, yeah, the images of burned children, starved children, of Israel video of soldiers videotaping themselves blowing up houses for no reasons, mosques and dialysis centers, it struck a nerve because they're working and they can't get by. But yet they have the Treasury and the State Department of Defense has all this money for war, but not enough for its own people. So that was also a big sentiment, which, hamstrung Kamala Harris in the past election.
How did you feel knowing that there were members of the uncommitted movement? I saw the videos where they were outside of the Democratic National Convention, basically kind of staging a sit-in, kind of begging Kamala Harris, like, please let one of us come up and speak. From what I understand, there was one that had a speech that was already written and from what I understand, approved. How did that make you feel as a Palestinian American that they allowed an Israeli couple to come up there and speak on the stage, but they wouldn't allow a Palestinian to speak on the stage?
Well, it's Palestinian erasure, right? They don't see us as human beings. And I would also say that about the Republican Party too at the time. So it's not just the Democrats, it's, indicative of the entire American political system. They don't see Palestinian lives as valuable. They don't even, it doesn't even register on their radar. Because if they had even one shred of humanity for our people, they would have allowed a Palestinian speaker. But even more materially, if they cared, they would stop the suffering in Gaza. They would enforce the laws on the books. They would impose an arms embargo for Israel's several violations of Lehi law, which means that you cannot use U.S. weapons to commit war crimes. It's several violations to Section 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act, meaning that recipients of U.S. aid cannot block humanitarian aid from entering a conflict zone. If they cared at all, if they saw us as human beings, if they viewed our lives as precious and as equal as Israeli lives or Jewish lives, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
This is true. One more for you, Abdel. How did it make you feel to see thousands, hundreds of thousands of people rise up in the streets to protest against Israel and for a free Palestine?
It's encouraging because public sentiment is turning against Israel, and lawmakers are going to have to, be aware of that. Politicians are going to have to be aware of that come 2026 during the midterms and in 2028. I think both Democrats and Republicans now understand that they can't go back to the things that things were before, right? They cannot be unapologetic defenders of Israel. Many Americans, whatever the reasons may be, whether it's out of empathy for the Palestinians or just wanting to be, military restrainers or just want not to be involved in foreign wars, they don't want anything to do with Israel. And, I think a lot of people are recognizing that now. So it's inspiring, it's optimistic, but, change can't come soon enough because I really do worry what's going to happen to us Palestinians come 2028.
Abdel, thank you so much for your time. Can you tell everybody where they can find your work?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at AbdelA1924. I also am the host of my own podcast, Uncharted Territory, which I release weekly episodes focusing on the pro-Palestine movement and anti-war movement in the United States. You can also find me on Substack, TikTok, and Instagram.
Awesome, Abdel. Thank you so much for your time.
You too as well. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.